SharePoint Online. Who's doing any projects on SharePoint Online at the moment? Yeah? Okay, cool. So you might actually know more about these things than me because it changes so rapidly. And I've done a few projects purely on SharePoint Online, and this session's based on some of the learnings that I've got. And if you find it boring, please feel free to stand up and go somewhere else. I won't be offended at all. I know how it can be with these sessions. So we're going to talk about intranets in general. How have they come over from the 1990s to 2000s to 2015 that we are now in, and also talking about the planning process of putting something on SharePoint Online, why it's slightly more different, but at the same time there's a lot of things that you already know that you can take forward from what you've learned building intranets. And then we can talk about the content management process, which I kind of put emphasis on, saying that this is probably the most important part of any intranet is your content. Without your content, there's no intranet. And now we've got new themes emerging called digital workplaces, and Microsoft is pushing a lot of things called digital experience and all those sort of buzzwords that come out of different consultancies and stuff. And what does all this mean? And I'll also show you a couple of starting points that I prefer to use when I'm talking to a customer or when I'm working with somebody, rather than starting from scratch. There are great ways that you can start at a certain point, rather than going through from a blank piece of this is a SharePoint site, what do I do with it? When it's come to an intranet, I say that 80% of intranets are the same. There's subtleties and differences that change per organization, and there's a body of knowledge out on internet and in intranet space that you can use as an advantage to when you're starting out. So intranets is an internal website that helps employees to get work done. Do you agree with the statement? How many of you agree with the statement?
Sure.
Yeah? Yeah, okay. So it's a place, it's an internal facing website that helps you to get your job done. It comes in different flavors. It can be different. Yeah, go on.
I really don't like calling it a website. I think the whole category of a website.
Okay.
That's like 15 years ago, yes.
All right.
But today, it includes a website-y bit, but it should be so much more than that.
Good. I like that answer. Good. It's going to lead into stuff. Cool. So here's some examples of intranets. You've got typically a lot of intranets have a news area, which is about, okay, what's happening in our company, a calendar of some description, nice eye-catching imagery, corporate brand. And here's another one. Again, bunch of links, more news. Yeah, more or less. These are kind of typical intranets that gets built. And there's another one. So you can see that there's a lot of commonality across most intranets. Yeah. So which was SharePoint Online? Could you guess from the three, the first, second, or the third? All three. Right. Actually, only the third one was built on SharePoint Online, but the other two should have been on online as well. Okay. So what's changed? So obviously there's a lot of demand now for mobile, right? Everything has to work on mobile, and Microsoft has done leaped forward in great strides for it to work in any device. The fact that now you can actually work on a document from a SharePoint site on an Android device or an Apple device, that's a lot more progress than what we used to have maybe 5 years ago, so to speak, right? How many of you actually work on documents when you're using SharePoint Online on a mobile device? Just to get my curiosity, because I talk to customers a lot of time and people are 50-50, I find. Some people embrace it, some people just kind of go, oh, nah, I don't want to work on my mobile because I just want to work on the office. Yeah, and then also we have this concept called a digital workplace, which was kind of the what you talked about as well, that it's not just a website, it's more than that, yeah. Is it another trend, or is it something that we already know, that we already have with the tools that we have today, what's been provided? So I found this really, for me, quite inspiration of talking about these things. Like you have this There's a lady called Jane McConnell. I don't know if you've heard of her or read her blog. She's a consultant. I think she's based out of France, but she works all over Europe. And she talks about these 4 different models. You have, like, the model A, which is like a very basic area, and this all depends on also on the maturity level of your organization, right? Sometimes we try to end up here with everything, but we're not ready yet. So, and it's I think for a lot of organizations it's a struggle, because there's people with a lot of different ideas and different ways of wanting to work versus what can the company actually deliver. The good thing about a platform like 365, SharePoint Online, is a lot of these things are actually there. It's about how do you plan and how do you introduce these things to an organization, and how do you take that up within your user base, within your community. So go and have a read. I mean, obviously this slide deck will be available for you, so you can have a look at her blog. I find it quite interesting, her thoughts and what she talks about. Because sometimes when you go into customers, they get a lot of information, I suppose, from the internet and also from different events, and these are the type of topics that you will have to know about. Sorry, I like asking questions from the audience, so I keep asking you questions. How many of you are in the business space, like as in, yep, as in business analyst or information management space? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, do you come across these type of scenarios daily? Oh, are you? Oh, brilliant. Yeah, because they, I find like I've looked quite a lot. There's like quite a lot of research now emerging around the social network side of things and ESNs and stuff. So, so for me, when I look at that, I kind of think about, okay, how do I translate that into what we have with 365? We have Delve. Have you played with Delve yet, or have you seen Delve? That's just now become general availability in Europe, I think. And Yammer. Who's using Yammer? Yeah, yeah. I'd be interested to know how you use Yammer, because this is something I'd like to find out as well, how organizations use Yammer. Because we are, people who come from, like there's this, I find it anyway, there's this bit of a conflict where there's structure and there's unstructured, and there's this, where do we use what for when question. So it's quite interesting. And again, when you kind of think about it, it kind of makes sense, because you've got Delve, Yammer, team sites, and then published pages for your intranet content. And where do you, where can you kind of start? I think there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's about, based on your organization level, your maturity, your understanding of the tool set, what do your users tend to use more? Try it out and go with that. The Nielsen Norman report, who reads that? A little bit, yeah. It was quite interesting to see this report and the contrast between the number of years it takes for an intranet. Again, they look at quite large intranets, so there's a relative difference of the size of the organization, the size of the intranet team, and how long it takes for an intranet to be delivered. I've worked in projects that's taken 5 years to deliver an intranet, and I've worked in projects that would take 12 weeks to deliver. So it's a different contrast. But I find that the trend of things being delivered rapidly and taking less time is now becoming more and more, because, for example, if you take SharePoint Online, you don't have to go into the hardware requisitioning, and all that sort of stuff is actually taken care of. If you understand the tool set, then you can actually quite easily, rapidly prototype something and deliver some value to the organization, and then try it out as an ongoing process. So there's that advantage as well. I mean, these are kind of common across organizations. Do you agree on that? Yeah, because this is the reason that we start intranet projects and say, hey, let's rebuild our intranet, and then you use the same tool set, make it pretty, but these issues sometimes don't actually go away, because for the key point of these things is that it's about user engagement. And this is straight out of some work that I've done. So this is one of the statements that one of the organizations gave. This is what we want to be. We want to have this thing that want to have full access to everything. And to me, when you read that, it's like it's too much. It's too wordy. It's got a lot of things in it that sometimes how do you get a say, how do you measure that they've done it? So again, typical themes about is empowering staff, distributed content creation. Who does distributed content creation these days? Do you allow everybody to create content? How many of you have done intranets that anybody in the organization can create content versus only departments? Yeah. Is that recent or is that
5 years ago?
Yeah. Okay.
It didn't work very well,
But you learned a lot, right?
management were happy with their decision.
Yeah. It's like that social engagement sort of things. Like this policing happens in those situations. You know.
By exception, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And then, simply you could say the intranet is the gateway to access information, contribute, share ideas, and interact with each other. That's like a very common theme, right? When you talk about intranet strategies and visions, it could be different. Yeah. I don't know why that's there again, but anyway. Talk about the planning place, right? So obviously, even with online, you can't just have a bunch of people and just go, okay, let's build a SharePoint intranet on SharePoint Online. There's the foundation bit, and then also you kind of need to test out, okay, what are the features and functionality. Especially with SharePoint Online, there's a couple of things I think earlier on business teams and the technical team need to kind of clarify first up before launching into doing an intranet. Typically, I say the foundation. I'll talk about what that foundation means, and also doing a pilot, because things change quite rapidly in online land or 365 cloud land, and also your business team and business engagements, and obviously your end users, because that's going to be the key. The reason that I say that, we have this intranet, which is kind of like a part of a puzzle, and there's a few bits and pieces missing when you start with SharePoint. SharePoint is good, whether it's on premises or online, on doing these bits really well. Document publishing, calendar tasking, search. And there's this bit about web publishing, which is always the bit that catches people off. Because we as CMO, it's got to have like a really awesome web publishing capability. But does it? It's arguable, right? For some people it does, but some people who've done in web content management or who have worked in content management systems, it doesn't actually give you straight word out of the go, I can build an intranet and off I go type of scenario. So what's missing is the UX piece and the templates and the things that you want to do an intranet with. It doesn't come with the built-in news template. It doesn't come with any of those things that a typical intranet has. You have to build those things, or you have to provide a provision to actually create those things, right? So it's intriguing to know that there's no starting point, but now I see, like in the marketplace, there's quite a few companies who are actually now coming into customers and saying, hey, here's a starting point. You don't need to build this stuff. Start thinking about your business strategy and your consulting of your content, and use those existing templates such as widgets to do calendaring or content editing or content creation is already pre-built. So you don't start from scratch like we used to do in SharePoint land. You actually get some starting points to start the work. And then we start putting in a little bit more your custom branding layer, because obviously we're talking about intranets. There has to be some comms involvement, HR involvement. There has to be some sort of a wow factor in the intranet. And again, the branding side of things is quite important. So here's kind of, when you look at the big picture, these are the kind of planning things that you need to think about when you are planning out on whether it's SharePoint Online or SharePoint on premises. It's quite important for you to get that for intranets or any web publishing based system. And then you also need to think about wireframes. We'll talk about this. I'll show you some wireframes that we use to help customers get started. And then you got governance operations, like infrastructure is not, you don't need to worry about it, but for certain type of deployments, yes you do, but it's more of a technical thing. But I'm touching on these things because that's quite important to understand. Then you got style and brand management. Working with design agencies is quite a key thing when you're doing SharePoint. You can't let a design agency dictate what happens to SharePoint branding. You have to give them guidance. It's not that you can't brand it to anything you want, but there has to be some sort of a initial input and guidance on how they can go about branding it. Otherwise, you'll just end up with lots of money spent on coloring it and then less money spent on actually using it. So all these things are artifacts of a intranet project for SharePoint. If you're doing it online, probably that infrastructure bit is going to go away, but still, depending on the way you wish to deploy it, whether it's going to be your identity model, how is that going to be set up? Is that going to be just using the Microsoft identity, or is that going to be using a hybrid model? All of the stuff comes into play. So you didn't need to provide for infrastructure bit, although it could be online. Yeah, and this catches people out quite frequently in my experience from operations point of view. Simply, it's a discovery stage, implementation, test, deploy, adoption. And the other key bit I want to find out is the content ownership, because a lot of the times we build something and then the technical project will go on, and then a shell's created and then say, oh, now you can populate it with content. About half of the way to the project, you should be able to populate content. Your content should be ready, even if it's dummy content. You should be able to try out how does that content creation process works. Because at the end of the day, if you haven't got a good way of creating content and publishing content, then you're going to come into trouble. So I talked about the foundation. So which way do you, how do users access it? So this is one of the key things that you'll need to have a good discussion with your technical team about. Well, are you going to use no servers on premises, zero on-premises servers? That means that your ID is actually based on SharePoint Online, right? Which means that the user is going to get a login prompt to log on to the intranet. And in intranet, well, this is a little bit of a, oh, I don't want to log into my intranet. This is the scenario that you need to talk about. Okay, how do I, in our organization, how do we access our intranet? If you are a completely cloud-oriented organization, then that is not a problem, because any cloud service you need to log in. Even once you're logged in, there might be some session caching or cookie caching that will allow you to repeatedly log in, but still you need to provide for that. Are you going to do an on-premises identity, like you have existing identity provider? Do you integrate that and then do kind of like a sync with your online identity? So there's three distinct things that you need to kind of think about if you're doing a SharePoint Online experience, because at the end of the day, if the user is getting something to log on all the time, that's not a good user experience. And I find a lot of projects ignore this bit and then they get caught out. So if I can emphasize one, please do talk to your technical people and figure out within your network how easy it is for a user to get onto SharePoint Online. And that also goes beyond your online devices and what your policies are around that. Okay. And the other one is picking the right plan. With 365, there's different flavors. So they're based on what you want to do, and this is where if you already got your business requirements nailed out and what you want to do, then you need to do a good comparison and understand, okay, if I subscribe to the E1 plan or E3 plan, what do I get and what do I don't get? What are the advantages, what are the disadvantages? So this is another gotcha for organizations as well. They will see the nice Microsoft demos and then say, hey, I want to do Power BI. Actually, you can't do that on SharePoint Online because of these reasons, because your plan doesn't match what you got. Or you want to do video, because video portals now, that's another feature that's available. It's only available in a certain offering. And also the release roadmap. I'll talk a bit more about the REST format. So there's this quite easy to understand. If you go to this website, that's the and this keeps changing. So this is another thing that you have to be aware of with SharePoint Online. This keeps changing. I think Microsoft is making efforts to keep it as close as possible to what they originally conceived, but it's good that it's changing because you get more features and benefits. So typically what you want to end up is in the E1 or E3, which gives you the video portal, social network, search and discovery, and intranet side. So it's not to say that you can't do it but you don't get the video. So for example, if you choose 3 business premium, you don't get the video portal. If you use the business essentials, you don't get the video portal, and certain functionality is not available to do some things that you might, certain things that you want to do. And the other thing is the release of new functionality and features is quite fast these days. Because back in when you're doing on premises, you could like predict, okay, 2007, there's going to be another year's time is when we're going to have a new version. But with 365 SharePoint Online, it's very, very frequent that you get updates. And this poses a bit of a challenge if you're going to do branding or customization. Via that in your setup, in your configuration, you can choose to get these updates immediately, or you can choose to get the updates after a certain time. What typically happens, what you can do is to have 2 site collections. You understand the concept of site collections, which are in SharePoint land. There's a hierarchical object, so you have a site collection, and each site collection has its own unique permissions. So if you want to test out certain things, you have a test site collection, which is like when you're doing on premises, you could have a dev server, test server, and a production server. But obviously, when you're doing SharePoint Online, that becomes a little bit challenging unless you have 3 tenancies. What I suggest is you have 3 separate site collections to test out certain features, and then you have a main site collection which is used as your intranet or your production one, and you can test certain things and you can turn those features on and off. So that's one of the other things that gets caught out. And just to show an example was that a few well, this last year that happened was you could create this URL called portals, and then it was there one day and gone the next day. So people created sites under portals, and then suddenly the URL disappeared from their admin center, and there was a little bit of a people are not happy about it, obviously, and Microsoft came out and said, well, we made a mistake, so it's going to be fixed now. So now with the video coming out, I think the managed path of portals now is available again. So when you're thinking of building an IA, you have to also understand, okay, how does that IA relate to what I've built? So just be careful or be aware of what's going on. We talk about branding. With intranets, you need to have some sort of branding. So the challenge, I'm not going to talk a lot about it. The reason that Microsoft is saying not to do extreme branding is some of the branding that you do may get overwritten by some of the new features that come. So recently they introduced obviously Delve and a whole bunch of stuff, and there are certain elements if you go to a standard SharePoint Online site on your default master page that they will change underlying. So there's I don't know if you know Chris O'Brien. He's got a web blog called SharePoint Nuts and Bolts, and he talks about what you can do, but then also the downsides of doing this is that you might not get some of the features straight away. So what you can do is you make a copy of one of the master pages that you want to brand, and then you maintain that as a separate asset. But what happens then is obviously when a new feature gets released, you won't get that immediately. So just be aware of when you're doing customization, it's a trade-off. Which leads me into there's a session today at 3:15. If you are doing one and you are interested in how to do the branding side of things, I recommend that you go to that session. That's by Jeremy Tech and Wes Ajuanan from Microsoft. So there's some really good guidance on how to do the branding side of things without breaking the SharePoint Online experience. So yeah. So from experience, what I've known is that if you brand your CSS and you do there's certain features like compost looks and themes and so forth, then you can actually get away without breaking the SharePoint. So the design heavy intranets use a compost look theme alternated CSS file, and there's also a lot of JavaScript involved. JavaScript used to be the fashion back in, I don't know, 95, 96. You used to use a lot of JavaScript. Now it's back. Now it's less more remote code. It's more it's not less more code on SharePoint. It's more JS and jQueries and JavaScript. The link dev.office.com patterns and practices, there is some really good guidance for the technical people, the developers among you, if you are interested to have a look at it, and it does actually give some good planning guidelines around when you're planning for a SharePoint Online intranet. There is definitely a lot of information there and some starting code snippets, things you can do, and the approach you should take. Is some really good guidance there, and the guys are doing a really good job. I think in terms of putting information out there for people to use. I always say simple is better. So these are two. I mean, this is the same. So this experience, which is what you get on a typical SharePoint Online site, can be transitioned into something like that. I'll show you that one as well, and there's no code used apart from using Microsoft recommended practices, and you can do that relatively easily. I'm not going to say easily; it's relatively easily. If you get a good JavaScript developer who understands the SharePoint concepts, you can do something like that quite easily, and that's not going to break anything. That's going to be upgradable, and so on and so forth as well. How many of you use wireframes when you're doing your planning? Wireframing is a really good technique, I think. And when you're using wireframing, what I typically try to do is try to make it quite specific for the SharePoint functionality. And we don't talk about design. We talk about the functionality of it. So, for example, if you have in this wireframe, you have your latest news, and then you have an annotation. So I say, how is the behavior of the news going to work? There's two sides to anything that's been displayed. There's the creation, and then there's the consumption. And a lot of the times we dwell on the consumption part and not on the creation part. And with a wireframe, before you build anything or before you start crafting your code and what have you, you can sit down with the developer and walk them through, this is what I want, and this is how it should be done. And then you can relate this as a way of testing the functionality as well. So you can do a rapid prototype and then check that the functionality is exactly what you want without spending lots of money coding something and then realize, oh, actually that's not going to work for us. So I try to use this type of template so that we can relate, okay, here's the screenshot that's been designed and how is that going to work, and then you can walk them through these things. And if you want these, I mean, there's online ones, there's Balsamic, and I create them using Visio. I have a bunch of templates that I've created to kind of work through certain things. I'm happy to share them if you want. Just flick me an email. It's nothing magical. It's just a bunch of things that you can actually start using. So I talked about the content creation part because it's two parts. How many of you are in this stage in the content creation, content consumption part? Are you planning from a planning point of view in the intranets? Who's doing an intranet at the moment? Yeah. And how far is the technical side of things, or is it still early stages? You've not had any technical discussions yet. Yeah. So with SharePoint Online, I'll just touch on basically on this. What I found is that they released the content by search web part, which is search driven, which is quite good to do discover information and then also display it in different ways, and also cross-site publishing. I found out that in certain tenancies, cross-site publishing doesn't work as advertised. I don't know, maybe it's just because of the region. And this again is something you can only find out once you start working on these things. Prepare to be surprised. It's another thing that I had to tell. If you're doing something on SharePoint Online, it might not necessarily go according to plan based on the cycle that you're in, and also based on the new features and functionality. So it's important that you set the expectations right with your stakeholders, your business stakeholders, and also your users, that in SharePoint Online things may change, and that's another aspect of a challenge that you have to kind of be aware of when you're doing this project. I think the most important part is that as an organization who's going on this journey to do SharePoint, anything on 365 or SharePoint Online, be aware of the changes. The changes are much more rapid than what we're used to with in the old Microsoft world. Yeah. But it's good. I'm for one is actually quite happy that I don't have to now worry about managing servers, patching servers, and doing configurations, because that actually took a lot of effort and time. So when I talk about published content, this is kind of your traditional publishing model, right? You have a intranet manager or an intranet team, and their job is to create content. And that content could be coming in from different departments, and we've had this kind of model of a centralized publishing model for quite some time. But now with the ability for anybody to be able to create content, that goes away. So in that scenario, when you do user requirements, it becomes quite hard to go and talk to each and everybody of the people that are going to be creating content. So one of the ways that you can do that is you have content champions who are what you call super users of creating content, because you need to have some basic understanding of how SharePoint works. And it's not practical for everybody to know what a content type is, or what a page template is, or what have you, those type of things. So the way that you can approach that is to kind of make sure that you've got a mixture of people within your content teams who can help each other, and also use some of the tools that SharePoint provides. Like we, for example, in one of the several companies that I work with have found that they use a Yammer group for content authors so that they could train themselves, and they can pose a question from there, and now you can embed the Yammer feed into their kind of working area, so to speak. So those are kind of the things that you can do when you're talking about content. Another thing that again, I'm choosing something from what one of the talks that Jane McConnell did was lead, don't manage. Lead your content authors, not manage them, as in like give them strict instructions, because we don't want to be told what to do a lot of the times. We like to have a bit of freedom, so it works in your psyche. If you give the people the tools and the and educate, monitor, and assist. So sometimes what you have to do is just give them some information right at the start of how to do it, and then monitor it. So monitoring is also plays quite a key part in understanding engagement and understanding what's the word I'm looking for? Analytics around how your intranet is being used and who is using it the most. So as part of any engagement, you should have some sort of a way of measuring who is using what. And with SharePoint Online, there's a few options. You can subscribe to a service that does the analytics, something like Web Trends. Web Trends does some really good analytics. And that's another thing you need to start thinking about, is how do we know that people are using these things? And again, video is more effective than tutorials. Nobody wants to read a PDF document which is 10 pages long. They'd rather watch a snippet of a video. And I find that quite important, that you create these little video snippets of how to do something, and then you use that as a training mechanism. And with the video portal, now you can actually create channels for delivering these videos quite effectively. With content, how many people have done this? You built a new intranet and moved wholesale everything that was in the previous intranet into the new intranet structure. It's okay, I've done it. It happens, right? Because there's so much to do that and then your deadline of going live is there. It's like, oh, let's get a migration tool and just chuck everything in here. it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it defeats the purpose of it as well sometimes, because it's about being fresh and being, if you think about why intranets get rebuilt, it's because the content is stale. I've worked on I worked on the same project for 3 consecutive times. They've rebuilt their intranet, only to find they've used the same content across all the times, and we keep telling them that, but they just don't have the structure to do it, and it's hard. Large organizations, it's really hard, and it's the content plan is, I say midway, but I think you should start it quite early on. Get the content team enthused about the project, and then give them the right tools to create the content. And yeah, I mean, 80% of intranet release days are due to content not being ready, not because of any technical challenges. And this is true. And I've been in projects where the go live date was 6 months, and then we've been ready with the structure, but the content hasn't come in. So it's another 6 months till the content's ready. So Yammer, I'm quite interested to know your thoughts on Yammer. You said you've been using it for quite some time.
We've got a very dispersed workforce all around the world.
Okay.
We built power stations. So in some cases, there's one power station in one country.
Right.
They've got no idea who else works for the organisation, how they get help. We put Yammer out, and the reason we used Yammer first was because it actually was inclusive. It touched everybody, so everyone had access.
Yeah.
And from the ground upwards, with no controlling at all.
Yeah.
From the ground upwards, everybody got engaged, started talking to each other, set up groups.
Yeah.
And having the conversations
Yeah.
about, something's broken, how do I fix
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's gone viral, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find that because you didn't put a structure in, it actually fueled the growth?
Yeah, I think putting a structure in would have damaged the role.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, because this is what I've been trying to tell a lot of organizations as well, is because the likes of Yammer, if you try to put structure in, it defeats the purpose of it. And I think a lot of people coming from the traditional intranet background has a big gap to kind of understand that, and a lot of people think of Yammer as an alternative to an intranet, which it is not. I think it's a kind of discussion board on steroids. We had discussion boards back in, when intranets were there, but it's kind of like discussion boards on steroids. You can put some structure. You can put some structure by topics and all sorts of things. But I kind of like your approach, and I've been trying to get that embedded in organizations and say, just don't think structure for Yammer, and don't try to embed the Yammer feed in SharePoint. You just don't need to. People know where to go. You just put a link to it, and they'll go there. But yeah, it's a good.
We do have the top execs who are on there, and
Yeah.
they're Yammer. So they're basically giving permission for everybody else to come on and
Yeah.
have those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, that's the lead part, right? When your leaders are doing it, then people feel a little bit more happy to do that. Yeah.
I actually disagree with you not putting it in SharePoint though.
Okay.
The power of Yammer is that it can sit standalone.
Yep.
But it also, exactly as you say, it becomes the newsfeed, the conversation, the ad hoc, free-form collaboration, anywhere you're doing business. So it should
Yep.
be inside SharePoint. We have it inside our CRM. We've completely replaced all the other note-taking in CRM with
Okay.
the feed because it lives in CRM and lives outside as well. So I'm actually completely diametrically opposed.
Okay.
Put it everywhere where people do business. Stick it to the water cooler if you can. Anywhere people put Yammer there.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, for sure. Yeah. Totally. And I suppose I like the water cooler example because we have conversations like what do I do and so on and so forth. And I was having this conversation about Delve and Delve in particular, because what Delve does is it gives you insight. It just kind of sits there and then looks at what you do, and then that kind of gives you little tidbits of this person did that. Have you used Delve? Anybody? Yeah. It's I'm watching it because it's almost like Microsoft had this concept of the knowledge network. I don't know if you remember that they had this product called Knowledge Network, which they pulled a few years ago. And for me, Delve is that product reborn in a different way. And also, what's the other one? Is the Office Graph. That's again, these are things I think it's good to start experimenting with these things now, and then by the time it's kind of like a product evolution curve. You kind of come to a point and you kind of like, oh yeah, but now we are experts in this. I'm no expert in Yammer. I know what it is. I use it for certain things, and I'm still learning about it. And Delve, the same thing as well. I'm watching it. I understand the concepts of it, but I'm trying to figure out, okay, how would an organization actually embrace this, and how would they go about using it? And the only way to do it is like learn from your mistakes. We've learned from our SharePoint mistakes from all the time, right? And now we try to be very I suppose in a way very rational when we approach something, and very pragmatic when we approach something from a planning point of view. And again, one of the challenges I suppose we have is that there's a lot of new people who's come into the SharePoint land, so to speak, who hasn't had this murky background to deal with of 2007 and 2010 and all the rest of it. But for them, it's quite interesting time. And I also think that we tend to forget that some of the basics are the ones that we need to reinforce back into the people who come in into projects. So yeah. So yeah, cool. So summary. Did I ask you about the proof of concepts? Who's doing proof of concepts at this moment? Any proof of concepts? Yeah. Yeah, how far along?
It's just started with SharePoint Online.
Yeah. And again, like I think it's the time is right now because Microsoft is pushing a lot of things. I think there's going to be some new things that come on board, especially in the intranet space, because what I'm seeing from third parties and ISVs, for example, is that you have these concepts of instant intranet products that come with pre-built templates and pre-built things that you can actually pretty much buy off the shelf and start using. And I think it's good because it just shifts the balance of you don't have to start from a blank canvas. You're actually given something to start with. I'll quickly show you one. Because we've got how much time have we got? Yeah, we got another 15 minutes. I'm happy to keep talking and you can ask questions and we can discuss. So I'll show you this. What we use. So that demo that I showed you. I need to switch that into there. Cool. So this is a live working environment. I use this as a starting point for a lot of engagements I do. This is why I call this a kind of a working prototype. But what it does is it helps people to talk about concepts and things like, okay, where do I start? Do I need to do a brand new IA? So if you look at 10 different intranets, you're going to have. So this is a very fictitious company called Flowing. It's a water company. I just used that as a random example. And there's a news calendar, our organization. So we have a kind of a pre-built IA that you can start using straight away, and then you can either change that, but it's a starting point. It's all structured and it's done. And another interesting idea is that when you go to brand SharePoint, don't try to brand everything, because it's got a graceful way of going into. So for example, the calendars, don't try to rebuild a calendar. You can use the calendar as it is, and you can do a little bit of stuff with the calendar. If you try to brand this stuff, it's just you're gonna end up in a big mess. So don't try to do it. I mean, that's pretty good. So it's got a utilitarian feel to it, right? And also when you want to add something, a lot of people try to do to brand these elements, which are kind of like SharePoint specific ones. So don't go there. This is SharePoint Online. It's built for, and it's easy for training as well, because you'd have people coming in from different organizations who's worked in SharePoint, and I guarantee you that if they worked in, I had a case where one person that I was training was in a company who was using SharePoint for 3-4 years, but she did not know what this view was, because she'd never seen it. It was been completely customized. So just be aware of those things. It's yeah. And even here, what we essentially done is this news area has a pretty easy to use news editing thing. So you go to this little cog, edit page, and this is completely out of the box. nothing customized. We've just put some information on the templates, which you can do using compose looks and themes, and so these for just for like publishing news articles and stuff. So yeah, it's very straightforward.
So where you got teams and projects, what have you got under there?
Actually,
And how different is that to sites?
nothing. Yeah. So
What's intended to be there?
the reasoning behind we put teams and projects is something that we come across all the time. We wanted, so when you think about the Steam sites to be built, right? So the idea behind here is that we'll put like a query web part so that we can list all the sites that's been built.
So there's some
Yeah.
sites as you've got on the top navigation.
Yeah, so you can hide that as well. So this one here, so this is, you got to kind of think about it as this is a bit of a different navigation to that, right? So that's your kind of your SharePoint global navigation, what you get as part of your tenant. There are ways that you can hide that as well using JavaScript. But this one is above the organization. So the reason that you put, well, the reason that I start with that is actually it's a good conversation starter about, okay, what do you want to do when you do want to do team sites? Do you want to list that in your intranet, or is that a separate area? So this could potentially be a link off to a team site area. Yeah, and even here in the resource center, what we've done here is to kind of have like a publishing area where published content can live. So again, what we were going to do was just put like a web part that has all of the published items in here. So it's like a lookup web part to link up all the documents and so forth as well. So to show you another example of how dynamic this can be, let me just open up the other browser. So this is again a one that's been built. So here's another example of it, but it's got a little bit more dynamic stuff in here. So you got like a bit of areas here, departments and the newsroom. So, and this has a custom component behind it which drives the news things, and it's using the SharePoint app model, which is another thing that Microsoft pushes. So this is there's a news app host which does all of the news, and you can have like most viewed, but this is a custom component. But again, it's built using the SharePoint app model and then injected into that area of a normal SharePoint site. Yeah, and you can do these things as well. The other thing was back to the home page. There was a Yammer feed in here, but it's not working for some reason. Yeah. Yeah, I usually start the conversation using the simple one, and not this one. I start the conversation using this very simple one because if they say, we don't want that, then I know, then I can push into the other area and they understand the basic concepts of it. Sometimes it's, again, it depends on who you talk to in an organization as well, and what their level of knowledge is. Yeah. Thanks, I hope that was useful. Yeah, cheers, thank you.